Okay, so the article is from the New York Times. The House passes a $40 billion aid package for Ukraine with few questions asked. So there's like a video of some Ukrainian families. I'm not seeing it. Like, what is so special about these people that they deserve $40 billion? Like, because of a war? Like, I don't understand. Ethiopia's in war right now. Why don't you give Ethiopia $40 billion? What about Yemen? They're having a whole like hunger strike. Afghanistan. Like, if you just want to give out $40 billion, why not just do it equitably and give it to like everyone? It just feels strange because we're like pretending like these white people's lives are worth more than anyone else's, and they're not. Like, they're not. That's why they got bombed away. Like, poor white people. Like, I'm so fucking confused. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. The House passed a second military and humanitarian aid package for Ukraine, adding to the $13.6 billion in emergency aid approved weeks before. What? Where are we pulling this fucking money from? Like, how? How, Slay? Where are we getting the funds? Not we. Where's America? Fuck it. I'm not a part of this. This is not a part. I'm not a member of this. I'm just wondering where they are getting the funds. I'm trying to understand. The math for me is just not mathing. I don't get it. The escalating brutality of the war in Ukraine has dampened voices on both right and left skeptical of the United States involving itself in armed conflict overseas, fueling a rush by Congress to pour huge amounts of money into a potentially lengthy and costly offensive against Russia with few questions or reservations raised. Like, what? Under pressure to present a united front as President Vladimir V. Putin's forces carry out a campaign of atrocities across Ukraine, lawmakers in both political parties who have previously rallied against skyrocketing military budgets and entanglements in intractable conflicts abroad have gone largely silent about what is fast becoming a major military effort drawing on American resources. The House on Tuesday night passed a $40 billion military and humanitarian aid package for Ukraine in an overwhelming 368 to 57 vote, weeks after lawmakers overwhelmingly approved a $13.6 billion in emergency aid for the war effort. Vladimir Putin was very clear about asking America to stay out of its fucking business and basically saying that if you are declaring yourself an ally to our enemy, you are our active enemy. And Russia does have nuclear weapons that I do not think they are afraid to use on America or anyone else who stands in their fucking way. So America seems to want war with Russia, which is like not a good idea. Like, I don't think Vladimir Putin is with the jokes. Like, he's not. It's Ukraine. Those bombs are real. Those bitches are really living in subway tunnels right now because he blew their shit up. So if y'all really think it's a good idea to go fucking with Vladimir Putin, I think you're confused. That total, roughly $53 billion over 2 months, goes beyond what President Biden requested and is poised to amount to the largest foreign aid package to move through Congress in at least 2 decades. What the fuck? It also comes at a time when the two parties have been unable to reach agreement to invest in domestic programs. Domestic programs are programs on American soil. So they're basically saying They can't make a decision about how to spend money in America, but they can spend $56 billion on Ukraine. The war is like won. Like, they're not going to win. You can give them all the money in the world. It doesn't fucking matter. Like, Russia has nuclear weapons and they will use them. Like, no one is afraid here. Like, the damage is done. The war is lost. Like, are we joking? Unless they're talking about sending American troops, like all of them, then, it's kind of like, it comes at a time when the two parties have been unable to reach an agreement to invest in domestic programs. They include the extension of a tax credit that pulled millions of American children out of poverty, and even a pandemic response package to control the spread of the coronavirus, as Republicans and some Democrats raise concerns that such spending could exacerbate inflation and increase the federal deficit. But stunned by the grisly images from Ukraine and leery of turning their backs on a country whose suffering has been on vivid display for the world, many lawmakers have put aside their skepticism and quietly agreed to the sprawling tranches of aid, keeping to themselves their concerns about the war and questions about the Biden administration's strategy for American involvement. Why is America getting involved? Like, why? And as Biden's requests to Congress for money to fund the war have spiraled upward, leaders in both parties have largely refrained from questioning them. Instead, the packages have swelled to accommodate the two parties' competing priorities, with Republicans adding money for military assistance and Democrats insisting that be matched by an equal addition for humanitarian aid. They have been backed by pleas of urgency from both Ukrainian leaders and the Biden administration, which warned Congress this week that more aid would be needed before May 19th to continue providing military support. On Tuesday, hours before the House was to vote, Oksana Markarova, the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, met separately with Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, where the measure is now headed to personally call for swift passage of the package. Her people are dying. They are running out of supplies and ammunition. They need our help quickly, said Senator Richard J. Durbin of Illinois, the number 2 Democrat, describing Ms. Markarova's message as "thank you for all our help, but please speed it up." Okay, so this person, Senator Richard J. Durbin of Illinois, maybe he doesn't realize that Flint has lead in the water and doesn't have... Flint, Michigan has lead in the water, so all the Flint residents can't drink water. Maybe they should spend $50 billion to give Americans water. But that's not a priority. Americans don't need water. I just want to let you know that, because I feel like some of you guys might be confused. Americans in Flint, Michigan, they don't drink water in Flint, Michigan. In Flint, Michigan, they don't need $60 billion to have clean water. Americans don't like clean water. So that's why Senator Richard Durbin doesn't care. Okay, cool. The result has been that, at least for now, Congress is quickly and nearly unanimously embracing historic tranches of foreign aid, with little public debate about the Biden administration's strategy, whether the volume of military assistance could escalate the conflict, or whether domestic priorities are being pushed aside to accommodate the huge expenditures overseas. Each time President Biden has requested that Congress pass emergency aid, congressional leaders have significantly increased both the military and the humanitarian funding. We don't have the funds. Time is of the essence, and we cannot afford to wait, Speaker Nancy Pelosi of California wrote to lawmakers in a letter on Tuesday ahead of the vote. With this aid package, America sends a resounding message to the world of our unwavering determination to stand with the courageous people of Ukraine until victory is won. They aren't going to win victory, so you're just throwing money down the drain. The package would provide $6 billion for weaponry, intelligence support, training, and other defense assistance to Ukrainian forces, as well as $8.7 billion to replenish American equipment sent to the country. It would allocate $3.9 billion for European command operations, including intelligence support and hardship pay for troops. Hardship pay? It would allow Mr. Biden to authorize the speedy transfer of up to $11 billion of American equipment, weapons, and defense supplies. That's fucking nuts. The legislation would also set aside $13.9 billion for the State Department, with the bulk going toward economic support fund to help Ukraine's government continue to function. Another $4.4 billion would go to emergency food assistance in Ukraine and around the world as the war disrupts the country's food supply and distribution. The measure would devote $900 million to assistance for Ukrainian refugees, including housing. So now we're paying for Ukrainian housing, English language, trauma and support services. When I read this, I feel like this was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I am just now entering trauma therapy, and there's a wait list of like 100 people to start the trauma therapy. Getting into therapy in America is extremely hard and expensive. It's completely inaccessible. So Americans do not have access to trauma therapy service, specifically Black Americans who need it the most, because American chattel slavery was like really awful, and no one has ever addressed it ever. Ever. So fuck all of that. But now we're providing, what is this, $4.4 billion for Ukrainian trauma and support services. So Ukrainians now get subsidized therapy. To be a Ukrainian must be like the joy of the world. I can't even, this is incredible. While nearly 60 Republicans opposed the bill, only a handful spoke up to outline their concerns with the legislation, arguing that the United States could not afford to spend so much abroad at a time when they argue the basic needs of American citizens are not being met. Yeah, that's true. Only Republicans opposed the measure, citing its size and the rushed timeline. Well, how about the money? Like, we don't have the money. The loudest voices on both parties were those declaring their full-throated support, arguing that failing to halt Mr. Putin's campaign now would lead to a more costly conflict later. I think we'd all agree the most important thing going on in the world right now is the war in Ukraine. That's not true. There's the Will Smith slap was more important than the war in Ukraine. Fuck what anybody else says. If you think differently, fuck you. I said it. Kanye West going to therapy is more important than the war in Ukraine. Rihanna's baby, way more important than the war in Ukraine. Like, by a long shot. Rihanna's baby trumps everything. And things going on in my life trump all of those things, but still. I think we'd all agree the most important thing, fuck you, Mitch McConnell, no one cares. He called back in about 15 minutes and agreed that we need to do this. Ukraine only and quickly, Mr. McConnell added. I think we're on the path to getting that done. Old white men are very strange. Like, this grumpy old grouch, he looks like the fucking Grinch, bro. Like, so Senator Mitch McConnell told Mr. Biden that a Ukraine aid package should move by itself quickly. Why? We don't have the money! Like, we're broke! You can't pay for shit when you don't have the money. You can't just keep printing bills. Some lonely voices on Capitol Hill, mostly hard-right Republicans, emerged on Tuesday to express misgivings. They were buoyed by Donald Trump Jr., the eldest son of former President Donald J. Trump, and a handful of conservative advocacy groups that mobilized in opposition to the bill. Good. I'm voting for Trump. I'm voting for Trump this year because this is crazy. Representative Warren Davidson, Republican of Ohio, and a former Army officer said in an interview that he was concerned that in quickly approving the legislation without sufficient debate, Congress was essentially paving the way for Biden to shift the nation's role in the world from fighting everyone's war to funding everyone's war. And that's a fact, right? We are funding this war. Was it urgent to get some aid to them early on? Absolutely, Mr. Davidson said of Ukrainian forces, but he added, in earlier times of war, lawmakers had approved bills with sweeping, long-lasting ramifications, citing the Patriot Act and the 2001 law authorizing war against al-Qaeda that has since been stretched to permit open-ended combat against Islamist militant groups across the world. When you rush these things and don't put the proper framework around them, bad things happened, he said. In the early weeks of the war in Ukraine, skeptical lawmakers in both parties were more open about their apprehension about the role of the United States in the conflict. More than 40 lawmakers on the right and left signed a letter in February warning Mr. Biden that he would need to receive authorization from Congress before involving American forces in the war. Some progressive lawmakers fretted openly about the possible unforeseen consequences of shipping thousands of weapons to fighters in Ukraine, while a handful of conservatives argued that the war was simply not an issue for the United States to become involved in. Who are those Republicans? Because I stand with them. But as Mr. Putin's campaign became increasingly barbaric and the Biden administration began to send more support to Ukraine, including quietly providing Ukrainian forces with crucial intelligence, those voices grew quieter. Congressional leaders in both parties have also moved quickly to tamp down on those voices. This is a large package, but the need is great, and the time is of the essence, Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, and the majority leader said. We have a moral obligation to stand with our friends in Ukraine. I'm sorry, when did Ukrainians become our friends? And what moral obligation do we have? I have no moral obligation to Ukraine. No. The fight they are in is a struggle between democracy and authoritarianism itself. We dare not relent swift action to help our friends in need. Those aren't our friends. Each time Mr. Biden has requested Congress emergency aid, congressional leaders have significantly increased both the military and humanitarian funding. The legislation the House approved on Tuesday, for example, more than doubled the arms transfer authority requested by Mr. Biden, effectively enabling him to dip into American stockpiles to send the Ukrainians more than twice as many weapons without coming back to Congress. So they have this picture. Irpin, a suburb of Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, lay in ruins in early May after weeks of fierce fighting between Russian and Ukrainian forces. Each time they have been urged to action by top Ukrainian officials who have proved masterful at rallying support for their cause, lawmakers were moved to tears by President Volodymyr Zelensky's emotional address to Congress in March. Liberal Democrats have pointedly noted that the aid packages for Ukraine appear to have a far easier path to the president's desk than their domestic priorities. A $22.5 billion energy coronavirus package has shrunk to less than half its size because of Republican demands that it be paid for with existing funds and is mirrored in an election year dispute over immigration. Our national defense is about helping the Ukrainians as they fight against an illegal and immoral Russian invasion, said Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts. But our national defense is also about strengthening our families and our own domestic economy. Clearly not. The disconnect around here really frustrates me, she added. But when Mrs. Pelosi visited the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and Poland to survey the wreckage wrought by Russian forces, liberals noted that she was accompanied by two powerful and outspoken anti-war progressives, Representatives Barbara Lee of California and Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, signaling the breadth of the American consensus behind Ukraine's war effort. We should always have a debate, but the problem is that Ukraine is in the middle of a very intense war right now, said Senator Bernie Sanders, the Vermont independent who has often led the charge against increased military spending. Okay, Bernie, yeah, I hear you. I think every day counts, and I think we have to respond as strongly and as vigorously as we can. The House passed a $40 billion emergency military and humanitarian aid package on a bipartisan 368 to 57 vote. And so there's like a picture of this happening. So Nancy Pelosi was speaking about it. Ugh, I'm sorry, but no. We don't have the money.